If everybody would, y'all continue to sign in on the sign-in sheets if you'd like, and we will go ahead and begin. To start us out, I'll ask Senator Tippins if you'll open us with a word of prayer.
Our God and Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the day that you've given us. I pray, Father, that you give us wisdom as we consider the matters before us. Lord, that we would give them due thought and that you would guide us by your Holy Spirit to take those actions, Father, that are in the best interest of the citizens of the state of Georgia and especially the students in the state of Georgia. We pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, sir. All right, we're going to go ahead and begin today with Senate Bill 449. Senator Dix, if you'll come up to the table. And just to remind everybody, last time we had this bill here, we had much discussion on it, and we came up with some changes, and y'all were going to work on some changes. So if you can just kind of give us a brief summary of what's been done since the last time you were here, and we'll move from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Bringing before you Senate Bill 449. It's a Parents' Bill of Rights. It's simply a transparency bill, which gives parents the fundamental right under state law, which currently doesn't exist, to review the material that their kids and students are being taught before each 9-week period. And in the committee meeting that we had last week, there were some changes from the education community that were brought up, and we did make 3 of those changes through those stakeholders, and I'll go through line by line. The first change, and it'll refer to line 61 through 63, and then it also line 111 through 113, and it's in the terms of videography and then photography. We'll change this to an opt-out, which I know that was a discussion, a hot topic from the education community as well. Instead of before, we had it as an opt-in, so the parent had to opt in. The parent, if they choose not to have their child photographed or videographed, then they could opt their child out. It also includes exceptions for safety and security, like was mentioned in the previous meeting, about cameras on buses and whatnot for security and safety of children. That language, there's some exceptions in there for that as well, so it wouldn't be included in this. Also, another change is just verbiage change. We made a governing body throughout the whole bill to reflect that definition in the bill. So it refers to several, state board, local board. We just changed all that to governing body. And then if you go on to line 106 through 110, in terms of withdrawing a child from sex education, the parent can withdraw them at the beginning of the semester of the 9-week period from the entire course. They can't withdraw them from a portion of the course. So it's either all in or all out on that. And those are the changes we made, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, sir. Any input from the committee? Questions? Well, as I said, we'd already heard this bill and discussed this bill, and I think a lot of those changes you've made are the ones that we brought up in this committee that needed to be changed. So I appreciate you working to get some of these, address those concerns that the committee had. So we'll just go ahead and plan on moving forward on this bill. We've already had discussion on it last meeting, and so I'll just ask what the will of the committee is.
Motion to pass. Second.
Got a motion and a second to pass. Any further discussion?
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Is it true, Mr. Chairman, most schools are already doing this?
I'm sure the senator knows of what she speaks.
Is that right, Mr. Floor Leader? Is it true that most schools are already doing this?
Yes, but well, I can't speak to what most schools are doing, but currently this is done by board rule. It's not in state law. This would codify this in state law, which would be clear and precise. I mean, board rule can be undone, fairly easy.
follow-up question, sir. If it's done by board rule, which is local control, now we're taking jurisdiction over the local wishes of the constituents of Georgia? In your opinion, sir?
In my opinion, no. Currently, under state law, student records and student data must be available. This bill would put instruction material and other information in state law.
All right, Ms. Leader, does this also apply to public and private institutions?
This is for public institutions.
Okay, do we have any measure that applies equally to private institutions, sir?
Not in this bill.
Okay. Mhm. I'm sorry, last question, Mr. Chairman. I know we,
All right.
all right. Does it seem like it's a two-tier system, having one set of rules for private institutions and another set of rules for public schools? Does it seem sort of unfair, unjust?
I would say no. Public school is, most of the children that are going to public school, they live in that district. Folks that and may not have a choice to change schools. Students that go to private schools could, for all given purposes, if they don't like the direction, or the parents don't like the direction or the curriculum that's being taught in this private school, they could pull their child out of that private school and put them in another one, or put them in public school.
Okay.
All right, who's number? Senator Halpern.
Yeah, I just point of clarification. Are we taking public testimony on this? Because I believe there was a sign up. sheet
Yes,
for this.
I
We
just
are.
was
Okay.
handed that. So we will. Number 3, Senator Dolzall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dixon, can you clarify the board rule comment? I believe that this is currently done under board rule of the State Board of Education, not local boards of education. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir, that is.
So this concept of trying to apply local control, obviously the locals can determine which curriculum they choose, how they choose it, et cetera. But the process currently of giving visibility to the parents is done at the start of each school year because of local board rule. I'm sorry, I'm going to confuse everybody on this, because of state board rule. And what you're endeavoring to do is to put this into law, which would require in the future, should it want to be changed, not a change by the State Board of Education, but a change by the legislature and ultimately the governor. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. So I think that if we would agree, which I think maybe we all would agree that this is a good process to have parents be able to see what curriculum is being taught to their children, that we would want it to be part of state law. And we wouldn't want it to be something that could arbitrarily be changed by a board without the oversight of the General Assembly and ultimately the governor as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Very well said. Thank you very much.
And then finally, I want to touch on this public school thing, public versus private. And I think that you did this, but I want to underscore by virtue of the fact that if you're going to choose a private school for your child, my wife and I do not have our children in private school, but we have looked at them before. Part of what we look at in the process of shopping the schools, if you will, as consumers of a product, is the process of looking at the product that is taught by those schools. We are not, however, compelled to put our children in a school and leave our child there unless we can afford to take them elsewhere, like we are with the public K through 12 system. So the virtue of the public and private schools are fundamentally different in terms of the choice that you have as a consumer. You can immediately pull your child out. Any parent can immediately pull their child out of private school and enroll them in public school if they wish to do that. However, not all students and parents in the state have the means of which to be able to take their child out of public school and place them into private school. So I think that the differentiating factor really is significant and should try to draw that parallel. I think is a pretty strong reach because the accountability in private school rests with the parents and ultimately those people writing the checks for them. We are the people writing the checks for the public school. And so we are saying that either through state tax dollars or local tax dollars, we are going to allow the parents that are paying into that system to have the same visibility that you might have if you were shopping for a private school. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that 110%. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I have not showing any more questions. We have several people, a few people to speak to this signed up. Taylor Hawkins, frontline policy. And I just ask each one, please keep your comments brief because we've got two bills and we've got about 48 more minutes left for this committee.
Well, I'll keep this extremely brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We've testified previously in support of this bill. We appreciate the codification into law of the fundamental right of parents and the recognition of the state of the right of parents to protect and guide their children's education. And we would ask that you do pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, sir. Next, we have Alex Ames.
Hi. This morning, I got a text from a Gwinnett parent that said that anti-masker protesters were outside her 7-year-old's elementary school. I don't know when we decided that extremists denying facts and pushing politics take precedence over our children, but doing some handy critical thinking skills that I learned in school, I did some research of my own. In 1961, anti-integration parents at UGA were very mad that they began to admit Black scholars, and they cried victim to the AJC because they wanted the right to attend segregated whites-only schools. Sounds a little familiar. I know it's an election year and you're very concerned that voters won't show up unless we terrify folks into thinking that Black educators and Black history are being weaponized against their children. But as a student, I'll remind you, we are your first priority. I'd hope you put your election interests aside and please think about the hundreds of thousands of Georgians who deserve better. Children's rights first. Thank you.
Thank you. Shoot. Next, we have Cheney. And this is for this bill, Senate Bill 449.
Yes, 449.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Benin Chansey. I'm a student who has gone to Georgia Public Schools my entire life, and I'm attending UGA in the fall. I just want to say that parents are not the clients of public schools and public school teachers, and that children in our nation are. So would you want to send your child to a school where trained professionals help them learn and succeed, or a school where the biases of every parent keep your child from accessing opportunities and honest history? Let's put the best interests and needs of all children first, not the opinions of a minority of parents who want to censor classrooms. The ultimate fantasy of this bill is that parents are somehow victims of public schools or teachers and that they lack rights. In reality, there are already processes to support parents' rights and even to report educators. This bill seeks to replace processes with witch hunts. Why are we passing bills to placate the extremists who spit on kids at school board meetings instead of passing bills to take care of what schools really need? Teachers and students in this state have put up with 2 decades of politicians cutting budgets for schools, and teachers still show up to serve all kids like me every single day. When I was in 5th grade, my class had 35 students in it. When I was in 8th grade, we didn't have enough desks for all my classmates to sit at, so one of my classmates literally had to carry a desk throughout the school to different classes just so he had a place to sit. I urge you to focus on the real issue facing our schools and leave curriculum and the truth to trained professionals. If you claim to care about children, don't undermine our teachers. Educators' working conditions and are our learning conditions, and we all deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mike Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Mike Griffin, Public Affairs Representative with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. And again, we're here to say that we support Senator Dixon and what he's doing with the Parents' Rights Bill. We certainly agree in principle that it is a fundamental right. We believe in the practice that he's got in this legislation that allows fair and transparent and accountable actions to be done. And we do believe in the priority of children and putting them first. And so we thank him for this legislation. We support it and encourage the committee to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, sir. James Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Before passing this bill, I asked that the committee really ask itself, is this legislation going to put the students of Georgia first, or is it going to put parents' paranoia first? I feel like that's a really important question that isn't being asked by this committee. And so I please ask you, when you read this legislation, make sure that students, all students, are being put first and not a small subsection of their parents' paranoia. Thank you.
Thank you. Rhonda Thomas.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm here in support of the Parents' Rights Bill. In working with parents across Georgia, we have found that it's very important. One of the things we'd like to see is an opt-in instead of an opt-out. There are many things that parents are not aware of that's taking place in the schools, such as surveys that really are not academic, but they should be allowed to know when those are happening and the ability to opt out of them. So, or excuse me, to opt in. Also, parents' rights, they're given these children as minors. Children have rights, but those rights fall under the parents' rights. So we're here to support parents. We want the bill to cover supplemental materials and not just primary materials, because we know many of the things that come into our classrooms come through supplemental materials. So that's what I'm here to support today, is hopefully to encourage you to do an opt-in. Parents need to know when their children are taking specific classes such as sex ed that may be going against their family values, and also collecting data on our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrea Young.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Andrea Young, Executive Director of the ACLU of Georgia. We are in opposition to this bill. We need to help our kids catch up after a year of school disrupted by the pandemic, not turn our schools into battlegrounds. Allowing parents to object to en masse to classroom content will contribute to a climate of classroom censorship. The review period burdens teachers. The bills employ vague language, and they're unnecessary because parents are already involved in setting educational standards and goals. I ask you to remember who our teachers are. They're our friends, our neighbors, our brothers, sisters, cousins. They're members of our congregations, and many are parents themselves. While 7 of 10 Georgia teachers are white and most students are people of color, white, Black, Asian, or Hispanic, I don't know any teacher who believes that parents don't matter. Every teacher I've ever known, including my mother, has wanted the most engaged parents possible, because engaged parents mean engaged and better prepared kids. So let's not turn our schools into battlegrounds. Let's teach our children civility and mutual respect from the way we behave as teachers, parents, and policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't just want, you have, number 4 was first. Who's?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Down.
Thank you for being here. Was it Miss Young? Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. My mother was a school teacher as well, so I know you were raised well. And my mother had the same connection in her mind between what she was able to do in the classroom and the involvement of the parents at home. With that in mind, this bill does 6 things. And I'm curious which of the 6 you object to specifically, and why.
The concern about the vagueness of the language, the burden on teachers I've also been a teacher myself, having to come up with materials 30 days within the classroom period, and then having random objections by any individual parent without standards of what those are. I mean, our schools are very diverse, and many parents have many, many views. And so how do you adjudicate, how do you respond to objections by parents when you already have a curriculum, you already have a process, you have a school board that's elected by the community, and you're going to now have this last minute sort of objection by an individual parent? It just is chaotic. It just would throw our schools into chaos.
What makes you
And
assume that it
what's
will
the
be last
standard?
minute?
Well, you're saying within the 30 days, once people have started preparing their lesson plans. I mean, if your mother was a teacher, you know, she was Sunday night preparing lessons. She was working, I mean, you know, spending her own money, sometimes buying some of these materials that kids need, making sure she took some candy bars or nutrient bars for kids who didn't have a good meal that day or forgot their lunch. I mean, our teachers, like I said, they're our relatives. They're our members of the community.
With respect,
what
ma'am,
is the
the bill actually
what is your
states,
concern?
the bill actually states that the district will have will have 30 days to respond to a request. My mother taught fourth grade. If somebody asked her what fourth grade math she was teaching, she could absolutely come up with the answer to that in 30 days.
But we know that this
Same
is not-
question around civics, same question around
Right.
reading, right, you know.
Right.
So I guess I would ask, do you believe, I have 4 children.
Mhm.
Do you believe that I should be able to request from the school district that the school district provide for me information on the curriculum that's being taught to my children?
I think that what I've seen most of teachers do is that they're providing at the beginning of the year at the parent teacher conference is your opportunity to talk about what the curriculum is going to do, and that would be provided. And so the question is what, you know, if something is already happening, what is the additional purpose of putting it into state law that makes it very difficult for local control, for school boards, or to make adjustments that work for their particular community?
I find the it's already happening argument interesting, similar one that we heard earlier. It's already happening, but we shouldn't do it, or it's already happening, but we shouldn't require it. It's a good thing, and it's great that it's already happening, but we shouldn't make sure that everybody does it. What's the
Because when you
specific
do it,
there?
because as you see through this process, when you do it at the state level, you take away the ability of local officials to respond to community needs and be actually closer to the parents and what they want.
But I thought we've already heard in this hearing that it's currently being mandated by a state board of education
Exactly.
order.
I thought that it was also something that the local school boards were doing, and also local communities.
I want to zoom out, and I'm not trying to trap you. I really do genuinely want to understand, because I think I would probably vote opposite on this issue. But you do think I should be able to know what curriculum my children are being
Yes.
taught, correct?
Sure.
You just think that should happen one time at the beginning of the year, but not at any point in time throughout the year? Is that the main
I think it
objection?
should be a process that is, you know, at the school board level, at the school level, where parental involvement typically takes place. And, you know, if there are concerns with, you know, a principal or whatever that's not being responsive to parents, I think that's, you know, that becomes a responsibility of the superintendent. But I think that this idea of micromanaging schools from here, rather than even our state board of education or our school boards that are elected for that purpose, does not seem to me to be putting all parents first. But that there is some agenda of an aggrieved group of parents perhaps, but in terms of the general political process that is inclusive of our communities, we vote for our school board members. They select the superintendent. We have a democratic process for how members of the community are involved in education, which is of course a large part of what our property tax dollars go for. And so
It is a
why we
large part of our
should-
property tax dollars, but it's also 39% of our state budget.
Mhm.
So the largest expenditure that we have as an entire state is the money that we pay for K through 12 education, about $13 billion. And I think that it's reasonable. And I guess I hear you saying you think it's reasonable as well, but I don't necessarily hear a clear path to
Yeah.
what would happen in
Well,
this
you know,
in the
one of the
instance
things
that
when this body does.
if I could finish.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That what to do in the process. As you know, many elections are very close, right? And so this obviously, you mentioned something about all parents. I think the beauty of this is that all parents, regardless of your zip code, regardless of which 180 school systems you live in, whether you're in a county school district or a city school district, you have the same rights afforded to you under this parental bill of rights. And I would say that what you're actually arguing for is disproportionate rights applied based on whatever a superintendent thinks. And as a father, I object to that notion. I think that it's perfectly acceptable for those people here who were elected by people from all around the state to determine what our number one expenditure, 39% of our state budget, $13 billion, how that is going to be, how we're going to allow parents to engage in that process. And I'm a little bit dumbfounded, frankly, at the I guess the insinuation that somehow this is targeting a certain group of parents, I'd like to know what group of parents you think that is.
Well, we heard from the earlier student that there are concerns, but I think the thing is, it's not that this, the.
I'm sorry, but
issue
what
is
are the
not that-
concerns?
The issue is not that this doesn't allow, that this gives disproportionate parents. It's that it gives any parent. So one parent out of a classroom of 35 could then create a whole system where what the other 34 parents are fine with the classroom instruction, but one parent can trigger this whole process that then takes the teacher's time, it takes the school board's time, it takes the adjudicative body's time. When we have a process, we have PTSA meetings that happen every month. We have organizations of parents in our schools. We have school boards that are elected. We have superintendents that are chosen by the school boards and are kicked out when parents are not satisfied with their leadership. And these are people who are educational professionals, and who are part of the whole specialization of being a teacher. And so I know that there are concerns that parents have. Not everybody likes everything that is going on every day, but we do have a community. We live in community, and the idea of a common school is this whole idea of of what the community standards are. We have processes for those, and it just seems to me that taking this and trying to restrict what schools can do and to respond to the needs of their communities. It just seems that it's overreach, that it's vague, and it's really unnecessary, given that there's so many different ways.
I just want to
that
clarify
parents
for
are
you,
involved.
there's nothing in this bill that restricts what a school can do relative to what they teach, what the curriculum is, et cetera.
I don't want to get into a debate. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Senator James.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me,
Oh,
ma'am.
you have a question? Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you. We're honored to have you, Attorney Young. And for my colleague who said that you had a good mother, he's correct, because I knew your mother. And Dr. Young actually has a school named after her in our community. And your father too, Ambassador Andrew Young. So, you had, yes, she had good parents and who made decisions for us. So I do thank you for your comments. I agree with you 100%. And I do agree with the young man who came before you that talked about the paranoid parents. We have to ask ourselves that question. And when we do, then we can understand better. So thank you very much. I just wanted to make that comment, and especially after he said something about your parents. Yes, I know your parents, and I voted for your dad many, many times. So thank you for being here and sharing the information with us.
Thank you. All right.
Did you have another?
Senator Jackson, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Young, thank you for taking time out to be here. Thank you for your service. The fact that your mother was a teacher says a lot about you. My mother and father were teachers. My mother taught 34 years. My dad taught 32. In fact, I taught 1 year in public school in 6th grade. I taught 6th grade math. So I understand the struggles. I understand that, the need to get out of a lesson plan and how it can be disruptive if people want to change your lesson plan in midstream. I remember back those few years ago that as a young teacher, how you have to meet with the parents to tell them the agenda, what you expect from the kids, what you expect from the families. And the fact that a parent could come and say, oh, I don't like this lesson plan, change it in midstream, not only hurts the lesson plan, it hurts the children, because not that just one child, the whole thing starts all over again. But the fact that your mom taught for so many years in public school is commendable. I understand what you stand for, and ACLU, the organization, stands for what it means. What we should be talking about is fully funding public education, so that young people in public schools get the best opportunity. And so instead of trying to make it difficult for the teachers, because when you're a teacher, and I hope most of you understand, it's an honorable position, but it's not really well paid for. So you do it not for the pay, you do it for the love of the children. And we should be fully supportive of teachers and this system, and helping them create a lesson plan and giving them local control and helping them do their job. Because what we're doing is, because when we take away, when we attack them, we take away from the kids from doing their job. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, that wasn't a question, but I just want to thank Ms. Young for being here and standing up for us.
Thank you. My
All right,
pleasure.
thank you. Who's number 11? Yes, sir.
This may be for the bill author, but my understanding, and maybe I'm missing something, but if a parent doesn't like what's being taught, they just have the ability to pull their child out of that course, correct?
Sex education, they can opt out of a whole course,
Okay.
but they have a 2-week review period for every grading period.
Every 9 weeks, 2 weeks beyond that.
And we drafted that with education leaders.
I believe that was, you went over that when you first.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I have no other questions.
Thank
so-
you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd ask one person signed up is Lisa Morgan. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Lisa Morgan. I'm the current president of the Georgia Association of Educators. But more importantly, I'm a 23-year veteran classroom teacher. And I'm here today to speak against this bill. And you may say, why? As an educator, we beg for more parental involvement. Every week, my note to my parents, we would love to have you come volunteer in the classroom. We need volunteers for the field trip. Anytime you have free time and would like to come observe, you're welcome in my classroom. So you're going to say, why are we opposed to this bill? We're opposed to this bill because it is part of what truly feels like an attack on educators for many of the bills that you are introducing this year. Teachers feel attacked. And more than that, this bill seems to drive a wedge between the most important partnership in education, and that is between the parents and the teachers. This bill makes that relationship adversarial rather than the partnership it should be, because educators and parents have one focus, and that is the success of our students. Public education is a public good. Parents are not consumers. Parents are our partners in educating the future of our state. That's why public education is in our Constitution as a constitutional requirement for the state to fund an adequate public education for all our students. When we talk about curriculum and curriculum materials, I want to talk about what happens in a classroom. Several times during my 23 years, my children, my students have looked at me, and the look on their face clearly said, Miss Morgan, you've lost your mind. And you ask why? Because I was teaching a lesson, maybe a lesson that the class the year before, that lesson was a wonderful lesson. That's why I pulled it back out. But for this particular group of students, it just didn't go well. And multiple times I've said, okay, everybody stop. Put your pencil down. Put your crayons down if we're using crayons. Pick your paper up. Crumple it up. Johnny, carry the trash can around. Everybody throw it away. This isn't working for you. I need to find a new way to do this. And we'll come back to it tomorrow. And we would move on. And then I would go home and I might research. I would talk to my colleagues. but I would find another way to introduce that concept because that's what my students needed. I can't tell you as a classroom teacher exactly what we're going to be doing next Tuesday. Because if I'm a good teacher, I'm changing my lessons, I'm modifying, I'm doing what I need to do based on my continual assessment of my students. Finally, if it is so important that this bill be passed, why is it not applying to every student who's being funded by public money? Why are we not including all the private schools that accept vouchers? Those parents, if this is about parent rights and it's so important, they should be included. But I would say to you, the most important person in all of these discussions are our students. And you can't put students first when you put our teachers last. Thank you.
Senator Jackson.
Ms. Morgan, thank you for being here today. As I said earlier, I used to teach public school for 1 year. Do you remember PTA, where the parents and teachers used to come together for meetings monthly? We're down in Chatham County. We all work together for common good. And I just want to thank you for being here and your statements, standing up for public education, but more importantly, standing up for the students in Georgia.
Yes, I remember PTA, and I can tell you that in many of our schools, just like those notes going home asking parents to come volunteer, those notes are going home. Please come to PTA.
Senator Anavitarte.
Ms. Morgan, thanks for being here today. One question, and thank you for your comments. I mean, one question I have, or I have a couple questions, but can you articulate to this committee, having been a teacher, in your mind, what should be the rights of parents in the classroom?
As I said, parents and teachers should be partners, and we should be working together because we both have the exact same goal, and that's the success of our students.
Thank you for that. But what do you think the rights of a parent should be for their child in the classroom?
The parents have all the rights they've always had for their children. And I will say, for example, in this bill, it talks about grades and parent access to grades. Teachers are available to parents, and that information is available to parents across this state. I went on the websites of some of our smallest counties. Tolliver County is one of our smallest counties in the state. Parents have instant access to their students' grades simply because we as educators believe that's important. Yes.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They have instant access. That's in our smallest counties. That's in I would say the vast majority of our counties. The parent simply requests their login and their password, and they have access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on any internet connected device to their child's grades in their classes. That's what concerns me so much about this bill. Teachers and parents are trying to build this partnership and work together for all of our students. And this is trying to put it in an adversarial state and come between that partnership that is so important.
So I appreciate that. So yeah, I do agree with you. I mean, they have access to their grades, but I would find a distinct difference between having access to, a family's grades of their child and what are the access of their rights? Like, is it transparent? Is it posted on a website in terms of what are those inherent rights that maybe a parent has without having to go, no offense to the attorneys in the room, but having to go, hire legal counsel to understand what those rights are. So, I mean, can you articulate to me again, what are the rights of parents?
I think parents have rights and obligations when it comes to the education of their child.
But what are those rights?
And I think those rights are, they have the right to be involved. They have the right, anytime they have a concern, pick up the phone and call the teacher. As teachers, we answer phone calls, we answer emails from parents all the time. That partnership must remain a partnership for the good of our students.
And I just want to make one last comment, because I know one of our colleagues here, in the committee made this comment this afternoon. So in terms of education not being funded, I believe in the governor's proposed budget, education is fully funded. Is that not true?
For the third time in 20 years, the QBE formula is fully funded. I would say that the QBE formula is the quality basic education. And I believe that my students and all 1.7 million students in this state deserve more than a basic education.
Well, I can't tell you what people were doing 20 years before my time, but in 2022, the budget is fully funded. Is that not correct?
For the QBE formula, yes, it is.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. All right, we've got a motion and a second. I will now call the vote. All those in favor of,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
I call for the yeas and nays.
We call for the yeas and nays?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Roll
we'll
call
do,
vote.
do what?
Yes, sir. Roll call vote.
There's no point in a roll call vote. I mean, we're gonna raise our hands or not raise our hands. So I think that that's pretty obvious to everybody that's watching or sees the record of this meeting. All right, all those in favor of substitute Senate Bill 449 LC 490855 ECS, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the motion passes 6-5. Who's, and your bill will move on. And do you know who's carrying this bill in the House?
John Bonner.
John Bonner. Oh, Josh Bonner. All right.
Mr. Chairman, you know what took past the Senate?
Do what?
Get on the floor. in the Senate.
Oh, that's right. That's my bad. All right, thanks, sir. Now we will move on to Senate Bill 377. We already had one hearing on this bill. It was pretty much exclusive for those on this committee to have discussion on the bill. And we did not get to the point of having public comment or question. So I wanted to make sure that we brought this bill back. This is a hearing only. We're not taking action on this bill today, but I wanted to make sure that we gave the opportunity for public input. As I said, the committee had input last week, and I didn't want to leave everyone hanging that the public didn't get any input last week. So I want to make sure I came back and brought this back so everyone has access and opportunity to speak to it. Senator Hatchett, would you like to give a brief reintroduction of your bill, and then we'll go ahead and move to public question and comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to say a couple things. From the time I took on the challenge of approaching this issue, I've acknowledged that it has been the subject of an intense national debate. In consideration of this sensitivity, I've pledged to do 3 things throughout the process. Number 1, to conduct an inclusive dialogue. Today's second hearing is evidence of that. Number 2, I do not want to inhibit the teaching of history, which is why there is explicit language in this bill that speaks to this intent, and which is why I asked my colleagues to please read the bill before having a knee-jerk reaction. And 3, ultimately, we need to give parents a voice in classroom subject matter that strays outside the bounds of simply teaching historical facts. There are 2 main statements that I've heard since I introduced this bill. Number 1 is, well, this isn't being taught. I think, Georgia teachers are wonderful, and most would never instill political or divisive agendas in students. Most would never imply that you inherent traits or failures of your race. But most teachers would never violate misconduct rules and laws to begin with. And yet it still happens. This bill, 99.9% of teachers are selfless men and women who live a life devoted to bettering our children. This bill, like those that prevent teachers from engaging in other misconduct, is for the 0.1%. It's interesting that some of those who are against the bill say, well, this would never be taught, while others in opposition to the bill are opining all over the internet and even in published opinion articles in our newspapers that it should be taught in school. I think the mere existence of these advocates for these divisive concepts exposes the necessity of this bill. The second statement that I've heard is this makes it so history cannot be taught. It is startling how many people still misunderstand this bill, Georgia residents and reporters alike. Fortunately, many media sources have done a very good job reporting the bill accurately, but there's still a lot of falsities being spread about it. I want to tell this committee that I vividly remember learning about slavery, about segregation, about the KKK, and those are some of the most memorable days of learning a student experiences among other eye-opening historical moments like the Holocaust. Those are the days when students learn just how deeply flawed people can be and how deeply flawed even our government can be. I am among those who will tell you that those lessons are not just valuable, they are imperative. And our incredible teachers all across this state teach those lessons so eloquently, so memorably, while intertwining those hard-hitting truths with the progress, triumphs, and sacrifices made along the way that gives us hope for our country and allows us to still believe that we collectively should be proud to be an American and proud to be Georgians. I believe that every single one of us in this room today understands our history and the ways it has shaped our present without having been taught that we inherit those burdens. We do not need to teach these divisive concepts to children, and I look forward to a constructive debate today from the public. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have one question. Who's 15? Okay. Please make it quick because I was going.
I will. It'll be real quick, I promise you. But, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a student of the pedagogy of teaching, I would like to say that the first things we were taught in preparation to become a teacher was, can you deliver an unbiased lesson in a classroom? And we cannot forget that teachers are human beings as well. As I sat here, I listened to religious leaders and legislators and even some teachers and other leaders talk about the rights of parents and what should and should be taught in the schools. And I'm taking a totally different approach to this, in that I would be very disturbed if some of these individuals were the teachers in the classrooms teaching my child or my grandchildren. How would they or could they teach an unbiased lesson? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other questions from the committee, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to those who signed up. We have a long list. So I'm going to ask you to please come up and be brief, no more than 2 minutes. And we'll hopefully get everyone in if time allots. First one we'll have is Jim Jess of Franklin Round Table. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jim Jess. I represent Franklin Roundtable. We're a grassroots education and advocacy organization based in Marietta, Georgia. And I have just a few comments about the bill. First of all, our organization supports this bill and have from several months ago when we first started talking with various activists and people that were interested in this issue. And I have here a letter that I sent to the chairman, and I believe your assistant printed this out. This is a letter that we sent to House and Senate leadership, and hopefully every member of the committee will receive this. It was signed by 1,000 different folks from around the state who support doing something to get rid of the critical race theory types of activities that are going on in our public schools. So please take a look at that if you would. And to the idea that this isn't happening, I have here a paper with several examples, and I'll just share one from my home county of Cobb County. John Nwosu, a current counselor at Garrett Middle School, which is in Cobb County, said in a PBS NewsHour segment that tenets of critical race theory are an important part of his job. He says, quote, "The part that is often left out is the critical race theory part, the part about the fact that our country was built on racism and the fact that that still exists today." He expounds on this for about 3 minutes in the interview. So I got to thinking about that. If our nation was built on racism, why does it say in our Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Does that sound like racism to you? It doesn't sound like racism to me. It sounds like standing up for the rights of free individuals. That is the basis of our nation, not some critical race theory critique. Then let me just make one recommendation. On lines 197 and 279, it talks about teaching. It mentions teach twice. And maybe I think it may be good to clarify that it's not teaching because it's not in the curriculum. I actually served on the Georgia Social Studies Standards Committee several years ago at the Department of Education. And the concepts, the standards are there in Georgia education in the 8th grade, in high school civics and high school US history. So instead of saying teach, perhaps we should use the word inculcate, INCULCATE, because
You can get with the chairman, with the author of the bill.
Okay,
and sit and
okay,
take that up
yes.
to them.
But because many times these concepts are not coming in through curriculum, they're coming in through professional associations that teach teachers and teach counselors these concepts. And then the learning, the knowledge, the education is being taught through a lens of this critique of history, which is ideological and divisive at times. So we fully support this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I'll
Appreciate it.
take any questions if anyone has any.
You do have some questions on number 7, Senator Jackson.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You said earlier you were a certified teacher.
No, I did not.
Oh, what's your occupation, sir?
I'm an editor for a magazine.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
But I have, let me tell you, I have been educating people about the Constitution, U.S. government, and free enterprise for about 40 years. I've set up 2 organizations to do that.
Well, sir, thank you for that. Our Constitution in this country is very vast and very different. And it has, I call it a living document, and we have made many changes to it since the conception of it, i.e. our Bill of Rights. But thank you for being here, and I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Let me just say
Senator Parent.
that changes have been made to it, but are those changes, have they been consistent with the vision of our
Let's
founders?
stay on the topic of the
I'm sorry.
legislation. We don't need to get into philosophical debate. Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being with us. So when the Declaration of Independence was issued, was there slavery in the United States?
Certainly.
Could women vote?
No, ma'am.
Isn't it true that that sentence at the time applied to white property owning males?
Well, if you look at what Jefferson wrote and why he wrote it, it came from the Enlightenment age. They believed in human rights for all individuals, not just white people, not just.
So then
not just
why,
males.
but they were not though, as you concede, living up to that at the time?
No, they were not.
But you still contend that there was no foundation that involved racism by lifting up the words in the Declaration of Independence?
If you look at our founding principles, they're grounded in natural rights, ma'am.
But those were not, as you already stated, applying to the vast majority of individuals on this land.
Does anyone you know always live up to their highest principles?
The question is whether or
Okay,
not.
listen, I don't want to get into philosophical debates on this committee. Let's stay to the bill. And so I would just thank you, sir, and we'll just call on the next person to come up and speak. Next we have Benin Chancey, student.
Hello again. So I just want to say, as a student, I'm concerned about the bill's impact on our ability to learn about the truthful history of the US and of our state. History is painful, it can be uncomfortable, but our discomfort does not outweigh the importance of learning about it. It is true that white supremacy is built into American institutions, and the idea that meritocracy benefits every person that simply works hard enough, the idea that that exists at all is flawed, and it is built on the precise flawed understanding of history that this bill is attempting to legislate students to learn. Acknowledging the reality of our country's history, both the good and the bad, the comfortable and the uncomfortable, should be the baseline to all of these conversations. And on top of all of this, this bill pushes to further defund public education, which is completely counter to students' best interests. So not only are you restricting the rights of Georgia students to have honest and factual conversations about American history and society, you are now restricting the right to a quality public education at all. The real problems facing students in Georgia are a lack of funding and teacher turnover. So please stop the fear mongering, stop the attacks on students and teachers, and reject this bill. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Taylor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Taylor Hawkins, Director of Advocacy for Frontline Policy Council and Frontline Policy Action. I'd like to talk about three things this bill does not do. This bill does not ban any discussion of U.S. history, not only in the language of the restrictions themselves, but also in the specific exemption of thorough discussion of U.S. history in the bill. If it happened and if it's a historical fact about this country, you can talk about it and you can teach it. Second thing this bill does not do is this bill does not ban the discussion of racist movements or racist individuals in U.S. history. Once again, if those things are facts or individuals that played a role in U.S. history or in world history, you can talk about those things and you can thoroughly discuss their lives and their effect on history. Third thing this bill does not do is this bill does not inherently marginalize any minority. It actually uplifts minorities. No study of history or the history of any minority in this country will be restricted by this bill unless it is taught from a standpoint that elevates or instructs racism in the classroom. And then I'd like to talk about three things that this bill does do. This bill does restrict the active teaching of racism, racial supremacy, and other divisive concepts that are dangerous to our children. If you move on from a discussion as a teacher, if you move on from a discussion of racism in the past to say that therefore students in the classroom bear guilt from that, or therefore that students of a similar race bear guilt from that, or inherent characteristics apply to any students in the classroom based on their race, that sort of teaching would be banned under this bill. And this second thing this bill does is it does restrict racism regardless of what premise that racism springs from. So this protects against racism from an anti-Semitic point of view, from a white supremacist point of view as well. Any type of radicalized divisive concept, racialized divisive concept, those things would be banned by this bill. And then lastly, this bill prevents students from being disadvantaged at an early age by the teaching of the concepts that meritocracy or that a hard work ethic, these are concepts that are foundational to further success in life. The teaching that those concepts are based in racialism or in racial supremacy in the history of this nation. This bill prevents those children from being disadvantaged by being taught that those have a racial premise and therefore have no need for those things. Those things are foundational and should not be taught from a racial perspective. We should be protecting our students, not by banning the teaching of history, as this bill does not do, but by banning the teaching of racism from the classroom. And these divisive concepts are very important that we take those out of the classroom. So we would ask that you do pass on 377, and I stand open for questions.
You don't have any questions. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Alex Ames.
Hello, I'm Alex, former Georgia public school teacher. Tomorrow in Forsyth County, there's going to be a school board meeting. In Forsyth County, a small group of parents have asserted their rights to ban a book called The Bluest Eye by author Toni Morrison. In the book, the main character is an 11-year-old Black child who prays for her eyes to turn blue so she will be as loved as the blonde-haired, blue-eyed children in America. It's heartbreaking to imagine that as politicians ban not only the history of racism, but the current nature of racism, and ban the identities of transgender children, they're also banning the stories of those same children, telling you what it feels like to be a recipient of that bigotry, to be discarded by our politicians. I'm not talking about history. I'm talking about today. Right now, the kids who text me after class and say, the lessons we learned, the people who sit next to me, my younger siblings won't be able to read about that or learn about that. Our students and teachers deserve freedom from the whims of politicians trying to scare parents into believing conspiracy theories. My younger sisters and brother deserve the freedom to learn true history, not the version rewritten by folks untrained in the teaching profession. My Black and brown classmates deserve the freedom to read books about their ancestors without tens of millions of dollars being stolen from their schools. What is so divisive about free speech and honest history for students? Why is it divisive that trained professionals on topics like history and English lead in the classroom in partnership with parents, not painted as villains so politicians can try to win some votes? When today's children look back, they will look back in disappointment on those politicians who lack the courage to stand for all of us, all children. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mike Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I am Mike Griffin, Public Affairs Representative with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. And the Mission Board represents over 1 million citizens in the state of Georgia, over 3,000 churches. And in 2020, the Georgia Baptist Convention met and passed a resolution against the teaching of critical race theory. And in that resolution, it talked about the fact that they were concerned that because of this kind of teaching, that typically it could end up making things actually worse instead of better. We want to make sure that the cure is not worse than the disease. But at that same convention, we also passed a resolution against racism because we do recognize this problem in our nation, and we do recognize the fact that it is a sin. And we sympathize with our brothers and sisters who have experienced injustices, and we weep with those who weep, and we stand with them. And we think about, when we look at kind of summarizing where we ought to be as a nation, I think that Martin Luther King Jr. Put it so well when he said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where there will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." We believe that he states it very well. And we believe that what Senator Hatchett has here in this legislation is some good legislation that would work to help bring us all together and be a better state because of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You have one question, Senator Jackson.
Reverend, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir, have we reached that dream of Martin Luther King?
We're working toward it.
Have we reached that dream, Reverend?
We're working toward it. This is not heaven. This is Georgia.
And we're a long way, Reverend, if I go say, and we're a long way from that dream.
And we don't want to get further away from it either.
That's right. But wouldn't you also say that to understand your future, you must first understand your past?
Absolutely. We're for the teaching of history, and in the context that this legislation talks about, it does not forbid it either.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Senator
sir.
Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. A statement that Martin Luther King offered when he was still alive was, "Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn." Do you think it would be okay to teach that statement of Martin Luther King under this legislation?
I think that communicating anything that he said as a matter of fact is something that people need to know, and they can agree with or disagree with it. This is not, again, what the legislation is talking about is the critical race theory. And as it is outlined in the pretext, you'll see exactly what it's talking about there. So again, facts are facts.
You don't think that there could be a chilling effect placed on teachers due to this new complaint mechanism and threats of funding cuts
No,
to talking about Martin Luther King or other luminaries?
no.
Where do you think the line between what happened in the past and what's happened in the present would be drawn as it relates to divisive concepts if you were a teacher?
Well, if you teach it as hopelessness, that would cause a very detrimental thing. And as you look at people saying that because of their past, they have no choice of being able to change their future, that's pretty hopeless if you teach that and say, you're going to be oppressed always because, you were oppressed, or you're going to be an oppressor because there were people in your past that did oppress others. And yet it seems to actually, in essence, teach another form of racism, which just continues to further divide our nation.
My issue would not be so much that, but in attempting to discard lesson truisms of the past in the sense of how they are applied in the present, such as I raised with the author of the bill, centuries of economic and educational exclusion and de jure segregation. Do you not think that that would have an impact today on peoples that went through that for hundreds of years?
Again, if you're teaching history correctly about the way things were, and you continue to lay out what the ultimate principles are of our nation, I don't see a problem with that.
You don't think that crosses into discussions of systemic racism?
Not unless you're teaching it as such.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
James Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This bill isn't all bad, but it doesn't go far enough. If we're really going to ban divisive concepts in schools, I don't understand why there are still dozens of schools and educational facilities in the state that are named after leaders of the Confederacy. The same divisive concepts that we are saying should not be taught are the same divisive concepts that they believed, that they perpetrated, and that they fought for. So if we're going to go away, I don't know why we don't go the whole way and make it easier for parents to request a name change for a school or an educational facility. If we're going to go, a certain amount, we should do the whole thing for all students. So to ban divisive concepts all around. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Nightstorm. So YG is the first two initials?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is YG Nightstorm. I am currently running for U.S. Congress in Georgia District 7, but I want to put down the politics for a minute. I'm a dad of 7 adult children, but 3 of my children are dead. Now, I have been in security as my main income for over 27 years. And what we have been seeing in our schools, especially with divisive content, is a lot of racial tension. And in one case, in one of the de-escalation classes that I was teaching, unfortunately, after the class, we had a young man, a Black student, who was very upset because his parents were murdered by white people. And he has been being raised by his aunt, who was also a teacher, but she basically been telling him since he was young that all white people are oppressors, they are racist, they are guilty, and they can't even be redeemed even by Jesus Christ. Now, after being taught this young man had a gun, approached a white young man and was attempting to kill him. Now, here's the flip side of this. I was able to de-escalate this issue, but guess what? The white kid was filled with just as much hate towards the Black kid because when he was 5 years old, many years prior, he witnessed his mother being raped by 2 Black men who broke into their home, threw him down the stairs, and all he heard was his mother crying while she was being raped. So now, as growing up, his mother, full of pain, said that all Black men were racist and rapists. So we have an issue here. There's a lot of pain and brokenness on both sides of this issue. But if we further exasperate this issue by continuing to be at war with each other and casting the blame game, we're never going to win, because us as the grown people in Generation X and up, unfortunately, we grew up with this garbage. This toxin was put into us, and now we're putting it into our children who honestly just want to move on. Now, only thing I'm asking for everyone in here, regardless of what side of this bill you're on, is that are we as Generation X going to be the solution and the problem, because we are showing our kids exactly what the brokenness is. Now, I said earlier, I have 3 dead children. Now, this issue with this young man with this gun, it could have went bad, real bad. And I had the opportunity to talk to his aunt and the white kid's mom at the same time when we brought the kids together. I said, both of you was about to lose your babies. Now, it's this brokenness and this hate that you are carrying worth the lives of your children because you told him all white people are racist. You told him every black man is a rapist. This is wrong. White supremacy is wrong. Black supremacy is wrong. Racism, regardless of skin color, is wrong. And I think we as leaders, whether we are elected officials, whether we are parents, whether we are teachers, whether we are counselors, all of us should be held accountable for what we do. Teach the history, but don't use blanket statements because Tulsa wasn't taught, redlining wasn't taught, the Tuskegee experiment wasn't taught. But all white people aren't evil and all black men aren't racist or rapist. I haven't raped anybody in my life, but I'm as black as it comes. So on that being said, I say, God bless you to everybody who has been hurt by this. But if we're going to have our children and we're going to be in school, I think all of us need to be able to look across the aisle at each other and say, hey, it's time for us to be a part of the solution. We will teach the history, but we will not make blanket statements. And instead of teaching hate, teach our kids how to connect with each other, build businesses together. So by the time they're 25, they're self-sufficient and able to live the American dream regardless of their skin color.
All right, thank you, sir. You don't have many questions, but thank you.
Well, God bless everybody on this panel. Thank you for your services. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Terrence Wilson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Terrence Wilson. I'm the Regional Community Engagement Director for IDRA, the Agricultural Development Research Association. I'm here today speaking about a coalition that we've convened of folks from across the state, students, parents, educators that are against classroom censorship. And so we've come together and we've had the following statement, that our educators, leaders should create laws, policies, and practices that promote diverse, equitable, inclusive, and culturally sustaining school environments. And we believe that these bills do the opposite. This bill claims to promote and protect intellectual freedom. It does the opposite by silencing educators, mandating the adoption of inaccurate concepts and points of view, prohibiting truthful classroom conversations, and punishing those schools that allow students and educators to engage critically with the impact of systemic racism and marginalization in this country. This bill claims to seek to avoid situations where students feel discomfort, guilt, or distress on account of that student's race, ethnicity, religion, color, or national origin. However, we believe that this bill sends a clear message to Black, Indigenous, Latino, and other marginalized students that they are unworthy of protection from the discomfort and distress that they will inevitably feel from the prohibition of discussion of their experiences currently, as well as their history. We believe that this bill threatens much needed school resources. And not only will this penalty comprise quality of education in Georgia's already underfunded schools, but it will also affect the education programs and instructional practices of folks who are looking to build culturally sustaining school environments. We believe finally that these bills will have an intimidating effect on educators and students across the state. Other states have already seen multiple instances of teachers and administrators being placed on leave, students feeling fearful of classroom conversation, and value programs being canceled due to the chilling effect of other legislation in other places. The additional burden of adhering to vague, restrictive, ahistorical, and sometimes contradictory learning standards is unfair to our teachers and students, especially as they continue to face challenges related to the pandemic. We believe that punishing children, schools, and families for political points is wrong. The sponsors of the bill fail to imagine a Georgia that values all of our children in schools. Sponsors of this bill fail to imagine a Georgia that supports schools in teaching all of our history, the good and the bad, so that students are prepared with knowledge of the mistakes of our past and equipped to build a better future. Their failure of imagination is their loss. But we will continue to be relentless in calling this legislation what it is, a political move to use taxpayer dollars as a weapon to wield against teaching the truth. This bill will be directly harmful to Black, Indigenous, Latino, and other marginalized students who experience racism right now, today. And for these reasons, we hope that you all will not pass this bill out of committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You have. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on behalf of your coalition, if you don't mind, of the 11 divisive concepts, you don't agree with any of them, all of them, some of them?
I think that the point that I'm trying to make is that we're limiting discussion of these concepts. And, I, like you, believe that our students should be prepared to come out of school and go on to further education, being able to talk about critically issues around race, issues around classism, issues around marginalization. We don't believe that this bill gives them that opportunity.
But correct me if I'm wrong, the bill doesn't say you can't discuss this stuff. It just says that you can't say that you can't teach that one race is superior to another. You can't teach an individual solely based on his or her race, so on and so forth. I mean, from all the testimony, it seems like the second one seems to be the most controversial.
I don't have the bill in front- that's one about
Well,
systemic
that's the one
racism.
on the United States of American state of Georgia, fundamentally or systematically racist. I mean, would you say that's accurate? You
I
don't
think-
support the other stuff, but maybe that one you think should be discussed
I think that it's
or
important.
allowed to be taught?
No, it's important for us to be able to let our educators and our students have these conversations so that they're prepared to go into a diverse workforce where they're going to be able to have to understand racism and its impact on students. And we believe that this is the incorrect approach.
Well, there's nothing in the bill that prohibits that, but there is something in the bill that says you can't say that whites are better than blacks, or you can't say blacks are better than whites. That's what it's saying. You don't think that should be taught in the schools,
I think
correct?
the point is that we have our students in our state that are getting that message in all kinds of different ways, right? When they go to a school named after a Confederate individual, when they go and they experience racism in their own daily life. And so we want students to be able to have those conversations. And so we're concerned that if you pass this bill, that educators will be afraid to have those conversations, that there will be a financial penalty to having those conversations about race and racism.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Senator Jackson, you had a question?
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you for being here. You said that you were a collection of several different organizations. Are this local in the Atlanta area or across the state or across this nation?
Some of us are regional organizations, some of us are national organizations, some of us are local here to the Atlanta area.
And and your voice is unified?
Yes, sir.
That you're not in support of this legislation?
Yes, sir.
And I would assume it's broad, black, white,
Folks
male,
from,
female.
folks from all different perspectives, genders, nationalities, different parts of the state.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, one other question, please, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Would you know if we pass this, what ways will Georgia have to enforce this law on the teachers of this great state?
So I think that, one of the most dangerous parts of this bill is that the 10% penalty to funding. We, as has already been mentioned here, this is the first time that we're scheduling to fully fund QBE over the past, few decades. And so I think it's important for us to understand that can have a real impact on schools that have already been chronically underfunded.
So you're saying if one teacher make a mistake, the whole school system can be in jeopardy of losing its funding?
That's correct.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir. That's all the question you have. Next, Buddy Costley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, my name is Robert Costley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders. We represent approximately 2,700 superintendents, principals, assistant principals. We supervise all of the educational staff in the state and are proud to serve our state's 1.7 million children. The first thing I'd like to share is thank you. In observing this process, I mean, you can't be interested in history and in your country without being fascinated with this discussion and with this process. And one thing I'd like to say thank you to Senator Hatchett and to this committee for the way you've posted this conversation. You've insisted on multiple conversations and made sure everybody had their say, and that is the way it's supposed to work. It has been very difficult, especially, even for the individuals in the room, regardless of how you stand on this bill. It is appreciated that we're heard. I also want to commend the senator. I've had the opportunity to speak with him on 2 different occasions to share some practical concerns that we have about the bill, and the process has been nothing but collaborative in that respect. So I do want to say thank you to this committee, and we're honored to work with you on this and many other bills for our kids. A couple of things that I'd like to share just in more of a practical standpoint. I mean, it's pretty obvious that educators in the state, including our members, have concerns about this bill. The way I would describe it to you would be concerns about the potential impact of what might happen. I do want to say that we've been addressing issues regarding not abusing our power or our podium in the classroom to sway students about things that they're not supposed to. We're not supposed to abuse our position. For instance, if we go to our local Baptist church, we're not supposed to come in there and tell people they don't need to be sprinkled or dunked. That's just not our thing. It's, we respect all of our religions. When we come into the classroom, remember in the Bush and Gore election, we were getting some complaints that a teacher might put up too many Gore signs or too many Bush signs. We go down the classroom, we work with the teacher, we either get them all down or we get equal access. We're not unaccustomed to dealing with the issues of respecting the podium, respecting the classroom, and respecting our kids' rights to make up their own minds. Ironically, one of the things that is concerning to us is because all of us are discussing, debating, and perhaps arguing about this issue, now all the kids are wanting to know what we're talking about. Now they're all paying attention to the news. They would have never asked us what CRT was 3 years ago. They will now, and they are now. And I think what our educators are afraid of, and of course, with respect to the language in the bill, it appears to be clear that the intent of the bill is not to stifle those critical conversations, because we want to prepare those kids to think for themselves and be prepared for those college professors when they go to college to be able to think for themselves. And who knows, they may reject or claim the tenets of CRT themselves. And that's probably our biggest role, is allow the students to decide for themselves, because they're asking about those questions. They're going to ask teachers a lot more about CRT, and there's probably going to be a lot more classroom discussions about CRT in the next couple of years because of this national conversation. And here's the biggest issue that I'd like the committee to consider, is to continue to use this process to perfect the language of the bill so that it's right, because your people, and I would argue that your teachers are your people, because your people are working hard and they're good people and they want to do right. Once a bill like this is passed, there are going to be more complaints, formalized complaints. We get complaints all the time, but formalized complaints. We want to make sure that teachers don't have to worry about baseless concerns or misunderstandings about what CRT perhaps is or is not. And they will be getting concerned. They will be getting complaints on them. And if you know the average teacher, if they just have a mama that's mad at them, that's going to cause them to fear. It's going to cause them to think all night. So the fact that there's a formal process about their performance or their behavior is something to consider. So this process, to make sure we perfect that, there's one piece of the complaint process, since we expect a spike in those should a bill like this pass conceivably, is, and I've shared this with Senator Hatchett, he's been very collaborative on this issue, is to consider language. It's not clear what they can appeal in the language as it currently stands. It's very clear that the intent is to appeal whether a divisive concept was abused in the classroom. What is another concern is it could be conceivable in the current language that a parent could appeal the remedial steps. I think in lines 116 through 121, it refers to the principal sharing with the complainant the findings and the remedial steps taken to address that. A concern might be is, as you know, a mama's going to ask, as a former superintendent myself, former principal myself, I'm going to speak with the mom and say, Mom, we dealt with that. It's been addressed, I assure you. And the first question that mom's going to ask is, well, what did you do? Now, of course, it says in the law that the confidentiality is protected, as you know. But if their answer is, for instance, I know we hate hypotheticals, but I'm just trying to get you the sense of the breadth of what might happen. Is if the mother is dissatisfied that the teacher is perhaps not going to be fired, and that's a common conversation we have. If we have an angry parent, they won't, perhaps not always, wants the teacher fired, and we don't fire the teacher because it was a mistake and it was addressable and fixed. We want to make sure that they don't have the ability to appeal the remedial step as well. And so what I would encourage the committee to think very seriously about is make sure we're really crystal clear on the intent of what we're allowing a parent to appeal, because you may have a very sincere system where principal has taken care of the issue, just like we take care of any other issue that we deal with over the decades, and has done the right thing by the parent. But then the parent's not satisfied because they want more. And then we create a state of fear. And then you've heard the word chilling several times in some of these committees. They're already scared. But let's make sure that, if they do something wrong, yes, we need to deal with it and hold them accountable, hold ourselves accountable. Parents need to hold themselves accountable. Kids need to hold themselves accountable. We just want to make sure they shouldn't have to be scared or afraid to serve for the sake of a lack of clarity of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. You have Senator Parent.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for being with us. I read recently that the state school superintendent in Alabama had to tell that Alabama House Education Policy Committee that he's received a number of complaints about Black History Month. Parents confused and thinking that that's CRT. Do you think there's a risk of all of this leading to confusion and then frivolous complaints like that would take up a lot of time for teachers and administrators, such as represented by your group?
Thank you, Senator Parent. I mean, when a new law like this comes out, I mentioned the word spike. We will expect to see complaints to test this process and test this legislation, and we're already experiencing now confusion from the public. I mean, everybody's still debating what is CRT. So, one of the questions I asked in the House side would be, if a teacher use the word CRT, acknowledge the word CRT, or ask the students to compare and contrast CRT with other views or lenses of history, it is highly likely that a parent might interpret that to be teaching CRT when in fact the teacher was being objective and just asking kids to compare and contrast it for themselves. It is assumed, and that's a dangerous thing to say, that this legislation would allow that comparison and contrast for students to think for themselves and reject for themselves, but we believe that many parents may not understand that, and we will get complaints that you said the word CRT, it was discussed in class, therefore I'm complaining.
Well, if parents in other states that are having discussions think that Black History Month of February is CRT, I would say, wouldn't you say that it's quite likely that if critical race theory was mentioned at all, there would be even more confusion if they can't figure out that Black History Month is not critical race theory, wouldn't you think?
Well, yes, but I think that's what if I were to offer a recommendation, again, I'm just one individual trying to navigate this conversation just like you are. And I appreciate you being willing to handle the conversation, is to be uber aware that once a law like this were to be passed, if it were to be passed, it is going to be tested by all kinds of unanticipated topics and conversation as the carpenter says, measure 3 times before you cut, continue to take feedback, continue to collaborate, and try to find language that clarifies the intent so that once a law is passed, if it is passed, again, our members have extreme concerns for those reasons, but we want it to work. We don't want true people. Your people are your parents, your people are your kids, but your people are also those hardworking teachers. We want everybody to be treated fairly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, sir, for being here this afternoon. Are most classrooms televised or recorded? Are most classrooms in public school televised or recorded?
Most individual classrooms, I would say today in 2022 are not, but it is growing by the day in the terms of number of classrooms that will have cameras in there for safety or training.
Okay. For those that are not currently, how can a teacher defend himself or herself of when a student makes a complaint? I mean, so because anyone can make a complaint about a teacher. If a student gets a bad grade, they're gonna make a complaint.
Sometimes.
Right. Well, when I was in public school, I got a couple of them.
Yes, sir.
Every F that a student earned, there was a complaint.
So how many Fs did you get?
When I was a teacher, I had some students that earned their share. But how can a teacher defend himself or herself against a complaint from a student?
Thank you, Senator. It's a phenomenal question because we're not unfamiliar with it. Remember, we're coming from the supervisor standpoint. We supervise people, and anywhere you have people, you're going to have issues. So it's not unheard of for us to supervise a complaint process for a parent who heard from her child or his child that a teacher made an inappropriate statement or inappropriate conduct. And so a typical way that would be investigated is we would call in witnesses. We would get the teacher's statement, we would get the student statements and try to find the truth. And whatever the truth is, that's all we care about. We want the truth and we'll make sure it's taken care of. Now, to your point, it is very tricky. Sometimes you would like to think everybody says, we agree. That's, we'll do better next time. But if there's a difference of opinion on what was said, and oftentimes what was meant, it may not even be disagreed on what was actually said, but with the context around what was said is often extremely important in life, not just our classroom. So sometimes it does get tricky.
And with that said, sir, wouldn't it be very difficult to continue to recruit good quality teachers if they know they're going to be ridiculed and questioned by their students about what they say or what a student interpret what they said in the classroom?
Again, thank you for the question. I would say it goes back to something that we said earlier is it's when we have these discussions, you're representing all of us and you guys are defining policy will be in decades. Your teachers are your people. Your teachers, your hometown daughters and sons and moms and dads that are, many of them are alumni of the communities that they're teaching in. And just remember, we need them to work. It's getting really tough. They're tired, they're exhausted, just like some of the other professions are. So we want to do everything we can to make sure we communicate with them that you have an amazingly difficult job that most people would not want to do, but they do it. And to make sure that the policy that's put in place is designed to support them in the right way and keep them in the fold.
Thank you, sir.
Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you tell me again the name of your organization?
You often hear us as called as GALE, the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders.
Okay, what kind of leaders? I mean, my mother taught for 40 years in Atlanta Public School, and my father taught and was in the area office and principal. Both of them were principals. And, I guess your organization didn't exist then. In the 11 years that I taught in Atlanta Public Schools, I didn't know of your organization, but they were great leaders. Mm-hmm. And so I can't understand whether you're saying that your group is for this or against it, because you're for this bill or you're against it?
We have not taken an official position on the bill. We're here to tell you that our members are extremely concerned about the practical impact of this bill. And we are not in favor of us abusing our power as educators to indoctrinate anyone. We've always been that way. We didn't need this bill to feel that way. We would prefer that this bill not exist. We would prefer this conversation not to be occurring at all. But we are also aware that the nation has decided to have this conversation. So we are electing to be at the table and to have it with you and try to have a resolution that works for everyone.
But I know that, as my colleague just said about attracting quality teachers and retaining them once they get there is already a problem. So nobody wants to hear about, things that they don't like racism. They don't want to hear about white supremacy and Ku Klux Klan either, but you didn't put that in there. You said we shouldn't have anything about slavery or whatever. That's what the last conversation that we had about this bill during a hearing. So I was just trying to figure out what leaders in the school system would be for this, because you say some are for it and some against, because you were I'm not saying you were talking out of both sides of your mouth. I'm just saying that you say this and then a few minutes later you said something to the contrary.
I'll explain it this way, Senator, and thank you for the question. It's like, sometimes we education groups will be, even I've heard some of your colleagues say, we're always against something, we're always for something. Here's what we're against. And I'm an English teacher, so I want to make sure I'm crystal clear where I stand as a human as well.
I taught English too.
I'm an English teacher and I am which is half history teacher. It is 1000% important. I would say I would represent all of our members in this, is that history must be taught. And just because we're uncomfortable with that history, in fact, because we're uncomfortable with that history, it should be taught. And if we skirt away from uncomfortable topics, then we will continue never to get anything done. So please make no mistake. Our members are saying to you, they want to teach history and they want to teach real history. And even more, they want to allow the kids to talk about it. And they want to allow the kids to grow in their critical thinking so that they don't need us to tell them what to think anymore. That is the true goal of our educators. What we're here today for is that if this bill isn't measured 3 times before it's cut, that goal, which I'm hoping that you all share with us, could unintentionally be cut short. And we don't want that.
But in the truth, and this is my last question, Mr. Chair, that if we mass the facts, the real truth, then why would we even need this bill? Because it seems that that's what it's going to allow us to not tell the whole story of what really happened.
And if I could figure out how we got here today in terms of this, of the nation and the media, and many of your colleagues feel that they must respond to this conversation in form of legislation. 3 years ago, it would not have been conceivable that we would be having this conversation about what is taught in the classroom, but we are. And that is why Gail wants to be at the table to at least help try to have that conversation.
How many members do you have?
2,600, ma'am, 2,700.
Thank you.
You have one other question. Who's number 11? Senator Brass. 11, you're 7.
But Brady, thank you for being here and I appreciate your organization and what y'all do. I guess a point of clarification, when your organization, when Gail takes a stance on either for or against an issue, what does that process look like? Do y'all take a vote? How do y'all come to that?
Polling internal surveys. We set legislative priorities each year, that are published. This particular bill is not in our legislative for or against those policies. And that's something that's, if I may just kind of interpret the question, Senator, we're nonpartisan. Our organization has a boatload of Democrats and a boatload of Republicans and all the beautiful colors of the human race inside. So we represent all of them.
Right.
If you put all of them in the room, they're going to have different opinions about that. So what we try to do is that common flag is what is best for kids, and let's take care of those teachers fairly so that they can teach them.
So did y'all or did you not do an internal poll on this?
We have not.
And I'm not trying to lead you at
No,
all.
sir.
I'm just asking questions here. So, all right. So y'all didn't actually poll this.
And that's why I didn't state a position. It would be unfair of me to
And
speak
that's
on behalf of that.
very fair, and thank you for sharing that. I think my next question, you had mentioned, or you made the statement to Senator James that you feel like history should be taught, and whether it's uncomfortable or not. Is there where in this bill, or do y'all, you may not take an opinion, and that's fine, but is there somewhere in this bill where you're not allowed to teach history as it happened?
I have not been able my concerns here are more practical, and that's why I've stayed away from, I have not commented on the divisive concepts. We do not want to abuse our position to indoctrinate a child on anything that is unfairly, other than the golden rule. Our issue is that, and I think it's been raised multiple times, Senator, is that the way people interpret this bill could have a chilling effect, and we need to be extremely careful to prevent that chilling effect so that good teachers are allowed to teach. In other words, you don't want your people accused of doing bad things when they haven't, when all they've done is had critical conversations.
And that's fair. Thank you.
Senator Anavitani.
Thank you, Mr. Costley, for always being here and chiming in. One thing, and I guess Senator Brass kind of touched on this. So in your comments, you would find that there is a distinction between teaching the history and teaching facts and letting kids kind of come up with what their beliefs are versus teaching or using very specific divisive concepts and how you actually teach what that history is. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
All right, could you restate the question, sir?
Like that there is a distinct difference in teaching in a classroom what history is, what the facts of America are, letting kids debate it, let them form their own opinions with their parents, their classmates or whatever, versus being in a classroom and while that history is being taught, that divisive concepts are being used while that's happening. That there's a difference between history and concepts.
it's
Not to put you on the
it-
spot.
Oh, well, I'm here at the spot. Isn't that a wonderful question? Because history is full of concepts and the victors, all, have, historically for the last several thousand years have written history, as we know that, and history is revised, as we know. So what I would say is it's concept for a teacher to come in and say, to assign blame to students, we would agree that whether we were talking about this bill or not, to assign blame to students or their mamas or their daddies about what happened. However, what we are extremely concerned about with this bill is if we allow students to have conversations about CRT, it is one of the #1 topics in the entire nation not to talk about. It seems to be a travesty of public education. We are going to expose ourselves to complaints from people, which I've heard the authors, share that they're trying to protect us from those complaints. It says in the bill that they can have critical discussions. Nonetheless, we want to make sure that our teachers are allowed to hold those conversations, answer questions about them. And that's the biggest danger too. A lot of times we're the trusted part of the family. Miss Johnson, my wife's a kindergarten teacher. My daughter's a science teacher. They get asked their opinion so often as it is about concepts, about, hey, what did you deal with this when you were my age? What we don't want is the workforce of Georgia's teachers to say to them, so look, I'm not really supposed to talk about that because I might expose myself to a complaint. And that is what even though our members may feel different ways individually, that is what they're most afraid of.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, we have been well over an hour on this. I know there's a lot of people still signed up that didn't speak to this for the second time. We can't be here till 10 o'clock tonight. But I just want you to know that, we're going to take our time with this. And if we're not called today, I encourage you to come back the next one. We will have opportunity, I'm sure, going forward to have continued public input. And we'll try to get as many people as I can, but for the sake of taking time, like I said, we can't just promise we can get anybody to come in. Yes.
On that point, would there be any thought, since a number of individuals have come twice and not been able to be heard, to allow some Zoom testimony? Because it'd be, more convenient if people have signed up and not been heard,
In the room, I would rather,
Well, I would too, but just if they can't come back. That's up to you. I was just throwing it out there. Like if we know that they have been signed up and they've come twice and they haven't been able to be heard.
In the sign-up sheet for that reason, because I want to make sure that if you come back to another meeting, I want to make sure that these get called first. That was my plan, so that these go to the top of the list if we have, when we have further public input. So like I said, I don't want, I'm really not trying to keep anybody from being heard, but at the same time, it's it is 15 to 5 and we've gone way over on time, but I tried to go over on because I want to make sure that everybody got as ample opportunities as we could to be heard. And so I do apologize for that if you came and were not able to be heard today, but we will make sure that you get heard going forward. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, can we, at our next committee meeting, can we just be concentrate on just this one bill so that we can give it the attention that it needs?
I would like to do that, but yes, I'll try to do that. I can promise, I will say that.
Yes, right. There's teachers like Miss Terry Stalker came all the way from Gwinnett County twice. And she hadn't had a chance to even raise her hand. So we'd like to give everybody the opportunity to speak.
Well, I will try to get everybody as much as I can. Okay, having said that, we will call this meeting adjourned for today and we will be back shortly and this will continue, I promise you.